For as long as I've been coming to the west coast of France, I have always been intrigued by the salt marshes. I just find them so fascinating. This is where they harvest all of that beautiful French salt that you see in the markets, the Fleur de sel. But I actually don't know that much about the process and how the salt is actually harvested. So I thought that would be something fun that we could learn about together. Come on, let's go check it out. I have my hat. The salt marsh that we're visiting today is called PREDEVIE, and you have to walk in a bit to actually get to the basins. But the countryside is beautiful, and the best way to learn about it is to join the tour. Our tour guide for the day is Alexi, and he's the one who owns the salt marsh and harvests all the salt. Another thing that you see in the salt marshes, which are really interesting, is amazing amount of bird life. In fact, the owner of this salt marsh has dedicated a certain basin just for nesting birds. So he's just left the basin alone so that the birds can have their privacy to do their nesting. And last week there were some people here who saw lots of baby birds. That would have been something to see. There are over 10,000 acres of salt marshes in the region of Saint-Gilles-Croix. While most of the salt production today is done by big companies to support the mass consumption of salt, there are a few of these independently owned salt marshes that are still producing salt in the traditional way, with techniques that date back to as far back as the Romans. And when you see what these techniques are, it's not hard to imagine that they probably haven't changed very much since way back when. The salt production process begins here, where the ocean and the river meet. This water then travels up through these small channels, filtering itself in a natural way until it ends up in the basins. The basins are man-made and filled with a clay soil at the bottom. The clay soil is waterproof. It's this waterproof nature that keeps the water inside the basin and prevents it from seeping out. But as the sun beats down, the evaporation begins, and this is what starts a thermal shock that creates a crystallization of the salt inside the water. On the way to see where they actually harvested the salt, we spotted the famous salicorn plant. Now, this is something that I have seen in France for the last few years that I never understood what it was. It usually comes in a little jar like this. It's sold in a lot of food markets. My French family would try to explain what it was. It's not a vegetable, it's not seaweed, but it's served as a condiment, and you usually see it either in salads or with seafood. Alexi said you could even eat it raw and encouraged me to give it a try.
Just the top of the plant.
Of the plant. And yes. This, you would normally cook this?
Yeah, you can eat cru comme ça.
You get eat yes, like this way.
Oh, c'est salé.
It's,
I was actually surprised by how salty it was, but in a good way, like a briny way, kind of like a caper. And apparently I was there right at the right time to taste it. Apparently it gets too hot in a few weeks to eat it and it'll all turn red and dry up. So I'm glad I had my chance to taste it while I could. All right, now we're gonna go to the area and see where the salt is actually harvested. So this is where it all comes together. To be honest, I am so impressed by how much work goes into this salt. No wonder it's such a treasured commodity over the years. It's really amazing. I think you need a lot of passion to do this type of work. And I think what's so great about France is you see lots of artisans making food in a traditional way, and it just gives you such a greater appreciation. And then all of a sudden, there it was, a big pile of salt sitting there on the banks. I couldn't believe what I was looking at was all salt. Having grown up on the East Coast in Connecticut, I couldn't help but think that what I was looking at was a melting snowdrift. I couldn't believe it, and I just kept wondering, what is it all doing there? All right, I better catch up with the tour and find out what this big pile of salt is all about. Harvesting salt is manual labor. There is no machine that's going to go out to those basins and start to harvest the salt. The only machine is Alexi with his rake and wheelbarrow. He's the one who's going to go out there and get the job done. I have to admit, every time he goes out there, I wince a little bit, hoping that he's not going to fall into these basins. But he has extreme balance and agility. This is a man who's clearly done this several times. The first thing he goes to harvest is the Fleur de sel. This is the creme de la creme of salt. He takes his rake, which is almost like a little shovel, just to scrape it off the top. It's so labor intensive that it gets the name Fleur de sel because it's thought that the salt worker is actually picking the flowers off the top of the salt marsh. Each basin will yield about 2 kilograms or about 5 pounds of Fleur de sel salt per day, which is not a lot of salt compared to the work that goes into it. This is why the Fleur de sel salt is a bit pricier than the coarse salt. And it must be harvested right away because if that water is moved or disturbed in any way, the fleur de sel will just dissolve back into the basin and you'll have to wait until it settles and collects at the top again. It was fun to see the salt right after it had been harvested. It looked exactly like it does in the little pot that I get at my local grocery store. It was also pretty impressive to think of how many trips it must have taken to build up this big mound of salt that was actually there drying in the sun. Next, it was time to harvest the coarse salt. For this, he uses a different rake. Look at how long that handle is. I couldn't help but think of a trapeze artist walking on the tightrope with a long pole. I think it takes the same amount of balance. But for this salt, he actually digs into the basin and starts to pull up the salt from the bottom. It reminded me a lot of playing at the beach during low tide in the tide pools because the salt really sort of resembled sand. He just keeps scraping the salt, pushing it from all directions of the basin until he starts to collect a little mound at the edge. Then it's piled high into the traditional pyramid shape, which allows the salt to dry better in the sun. And in case of rain, the water will run off the sides and protect the salt from dissolving. Alexei will harvest anywhere from 50 to 70 kilos of this coarse salt a day per basin. So that's about 110 to 154 pounds of salt. And that's just one basin. He has 43 more basins to go. So during the summer months, he brings in some seasonal workers to help with the harvest. All right, now for the best part. We have to buy some salt. So let's see what they have. How cute is this little cabin? All right. Bonjour. What's interesting about the way the salt is sold is that it isn't sold to major supermarkets. It's only sold to the weekly markets that happen in the region, as well as the little salt cabin here during the tourist months. I love to bring home the fleur de sel because it's so expensive back in the States, and it's such a nice local thing to bring back that's easy to tuck in your suitcase. This is really interesting. This actually has the seaweed in it. So if you come here, you can take a look. You see it says the big salt with the seaweed. So that's actually the seaweed in the salt. I was curious what you might use the seaweed salt for. And does it give the taste of the seaweed? Maybe I could ask her.
Yes.
Excusez-moi. Ça donne le goût des algues dans la cuisine? So the seaweed salt does give the taste of seaweed. I guess more of like a briny taste, almost like a cornichon or like a caper. You do find that a lot in this part of France, products that are made with seaweed, whether it be pesto or seaweed in seasoning or seaweed tapenade. I just find it really interesting. So he says you can use it for potatoes, you can put it in rice, so really you can use it for anything. We have our fleur de sel and we're gonna cook with this when I get home. Welcome back to my kitchen. So I'm going to show you how to make something really delicious for the summertime. It's a caramel au beurre salé served over ice cream or even a crepe. And if you want to know how to make the crepe, I'll leave my recipe in the link below. So normally this recipe is made with salted butter. So this butter is coming from the island of Noirmoutier, which is not very far from here, and it's a salt producing island. You can see the little salt worker there. But this butter can be hard to find outside of France. So I'm going to show you how to make it with just regular unsalted butter. And then we are going to top it off with the fleur de sel that we bought at the little salt boutique. So the first thing you want to do is melt your sugar. So I have a cup of just white granulated sugar that I'm going to put into a large pot. You want something with a heavy profile like this because when we add our heavy cream, it is going to boil up and you want to make sure that it doesn't boil over. Then you want to put it on medium-high heat and just let it do its thing. This is where the patience comes into play because you really don't want to take a fork or a spatula and start getting in there and stirring it. The best way to melt the sugar is just to let it melt all on its own, swirling the pan as needed. At first it'll look like it's not doing anything, but you'll see around the edges, it'll start to turn translucent and kind of amber brown. That's what you want. You just want to make sure you keep an eye on it. This isn't something you want to walk away from because this can burn really quickly if you're not careful and you're not watching it. If at any time it starts to bubble like that and smoke, that is when you want to turn this down because that means it's a little too hot. And just give it a swirl because the smoking is the first step before burning. And once it burns, you gotta start all over again. Burnt caramel is just not a good taste. And slowly but surely, all the sugar will melt and it'll become a clear, beautiful caramel. At this stage, you can use a non-stick wire whisk and then you can put it in the pot. And that way you can stir up any of the sugar that still needs to be melted. Then I'm just gonna set this aside and then heat up in this little pan some heavy cream. So here in France, I think this is probably the closest approximation we have to heavy cream in the States, which is crème fleurette. This took a lot of trial and error, but I think this is it. But any of you French American viewers, if you could let me know if this is the closest to heavy cream, I would be so appreciative. I've tried crème liquide, I've tried crème entière, but I think this crème fleurette would be the closest, but you let me know. All right, so in it goes. I'm just gonna use the whole thing because depending on how runny you like it, you may wanna use half a bottle, you may wanna use a full bottle. I've also found that it tends to work a little bit better when the cream is warm. So we're just gonna heat this up. See, it's starting to simmer a little bit. Once it starts to bubble like that, then you know it's good to go. We wanna just melt this down again just so that it's more liquefied. That will make it easier to combine with our heavy cream. And now we are going to slowly pour in our heavy cream, just a little bit at a time. There we go. See, this is why you want that high profile hot here. Okay, now at this stage is when you add the butter. So I would add about a tablespoon of unsalted butter, and it goes, and this is gonna create that really delicious buttery sauce. The other thing is this sauce will thicken as you let it cool. So this is really hot right now, and if I poured this on cold ice cream, it's just gonna turn into a soupy mess. So it's probably better to let it cool just a little bit, and as it cools, it will definitely thicken. So a little dab will do ya. I probably would just do a pinch or two. There we go. Now for the ice cream. So I'm just using a high quality vanilla ice cream. If you're in France or you're visiting, this is my favorite brand, this Carte d'Or. Or as my husband would say,
Carte d'Or.
And it's the one thing I really miss when we go back to the States. It's the ice cream in France. There's nothing quite like it. Look at that. So good. I think we're gonna go for 2 scoops here. All right, here we go. A little drizzle will do ya. This is such an easy dessert for summer entertaining because you can make the sauce in advance and then all you have to do is heat it up and serve it with your favorite little cookies. All right, let's give it a taste, shall we? Oh my gosh, with the French ice cream, how good is this? This is so delicious. You guys have to try this, and I bet you have all of these ingredients sitting in your pantry and fridge as we speak. All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed the visit, and I hope you enjoyed the recipe, and I'll see you back here next week with another one of my French adventures. Until then, bye.